I'm Steve Reeder, and this is Judy Mobley, and we're filming another segment of Monrovia Moments. And the film crew is Owen DeWeese, and he's part of the radio and TV class. He's also part of my AP US History class. So the first question we have is, what year did you graduate from Monrovia?
I graduated in 1972.
And how are you connected to the McCracken family?
My stepdad was Ron McCracken, who was Branch McCracken's nephew, and he was a graduate of Monrovia in 1946. And so obviously my stepdad, when my mom married him, we moved to Monrovia shortly after that. So that's how we came to be in Monrovia. So.
Now, he was also a Korean War veteran, correct?
Yes, so he'd served in the Korean War, went to Monrovia. They had dated at that point when they were both in high school, and then went their separate ways. She married my dad, and he went to the Korean War, and then came back, and then, met up years later. And they met up via rodeo, which is, we'll get into that later, is just just something they did back then. And they had always done that and known each other because of that. So, and so then that's how we ended up in Monrovia, because he came back. We moved here for a job. So.
And who were his parents?
His parents were Bonnie and Jesse McCracken, and so that was Branch's older brother, and who had served in World War I. And lived here. They farmed, even though they lived real close in town, because they just lived down here on 39. But that was still farm, Bonnie also had. He was the mail carrier back then. I don't remember I just remember the stories of they carried the mail via horseback. Because the roads were so bad and muddy, they couldn't get through. And so then they'd get these people that would actually deliver to the rural areas so people would get mail, which to me seems really crazy.
And there's an ironic twist where the Branch McCracken historical marker is now is where Bonnie and Jesse eventually lived.
They lived on this farm, and Monrovia, so where the library's at now, there used to be two little houses that sat there, and they lived in one of them. Well, they had bought it, rented it out to teachers because the school was across the road, the old school, and knowing later when they retired, that's where they'd moved. So that's where they lived most of that I remember them as a kid. And so it's kind of, then years later, fast forward, the school bought the property, houses were torn down, and eventually, it sat empty for a long time, and then the school, I don't know how it came to be, but the school somehow gave the property, I don't know how they built the library there, but they did. And so now Branch McCracken's marker is on that property, and I don't know, how that got picked, but it's kind of ironic that it was on his brother's property. So
I think a lot of that had to do with the work of Mike Marsh and then Cassie Jones, who the library wanted it there, because it was across from the old school.
Yeah.
Which it really is kind of an ironic twist that everybody worked together and it happened to be there.
Yeah.
You already briefly mentioned this, but explain the Saddle Club.
So my mom she grew up in Johnson County, went to Trafalgar, that's where she graduated, which was another, back then there was just small schools, little burgs of small schools, and every school had a basketball team. That was it, that's what they did on Saturday night. Everybody went, gym was packed. All 400 seats. Because they were small, but they were just small schools. So my mom grew up doing that. She was a cheerleader and doing rodeo, and that's because they lived on a farm. Everybody had horses, and they go to these rodeos. So there was these saddle clubs, and in different areas, and there was a Monrovia Saddle Club, which my stepdad Ron and his parents were involved with. A lot of other people, Ruth Watson, some of these other people you've interviewed were involved in it. And that's just what they did on weekends. And they'd have this huge rodeo, and everybody went and competed. And and then the other west of town, the first farm as you go out of Monrovia, I don't know who owned it then. It was Shotter's at one point. I don't know if that was the true, who owned it then. But that flat area is where they'd have one, and my grandfather, my mom's dad, actually was injured there at a rodeo and died from his injuries. And which another ironic part of that was he was 42 when he passed, and was from, he lived about a week after the injury and then, passed. My stepdad had an accident when he was 42 and survived 1 week and then died for that. So it's like my mom's dad died at 42 and then her husband died at 42. It's like there's just weird things like that.
Now, also, Monrovia is starting to really regain its FFA status, and 4-H is starting to make a comeback. But when you were a kid, 4-H was just massive, correct? So what was that like?
Well, and so 4-H, and we did that because we had, I didn't, but my older siblings did. We had farm animals, and so where the bank is now was the school. Behind it, they had a big 4-H fair, and they put up this huge tent, and we competed, like my sister with our horse, which was, like we didn't have like great lives. It wasn't like it was good stuff, but that's just what everybody did. Everybody loaded up their stuff and brought it in for the day, and they had, food and, but everything was in Monrovia. That was the other thing. Growing up as a kid, like we didn't leave Monrovia. There were 2 grocery stores, there were restaurants, everything you needed. There was more than one hardware store. There were 2 gas stations. You just didn't leave Monrovia. And so to have the fair here, and then you competed here, and if you did well, you got to go to the Morgan County Fair, which is kind of like now kids go to the county fair and then they go to the state fair. And back then it was you went to the local fair and then you went to the county fair. And the same way with FFA. FFA was, like even when my stepdad, and then both my brothers was in FFA here. So it was, it was a big, and I don't know why it went away, just one of those things that maybe interests with kids or maybe sponsors, I don't know, but it was a big deal.
The other thing, there was a connection was between Monrovia and Trafalgar was the tomato processing.
Yeah, which is that and other like weird, I don't know, ironic things, because we moved to Monrovia, my stepdad, and I was young, so I don't, it wasn't like I heard conversations, but I just know we moved to Monrovia, we moved west of town, and we lived near the Bray Farms, which that's what they did, they raised tomatoes. And I can remember there were these little, I don't know what you call them, cabins, and they were different. They were up off the ground. They didn't have foundations. They were kind of built on stilts kind of thing, probably for airflow so they weren't hot or something. Little one-room kind of things. And that's where the migrant workers moved in. They moved in for just a period of time. They picked all the tomatoes. They also did that in Johnson County near Trafalgar, which is where my mom was from, and they actually had a processing plant there. And so a lot of the tomatoes were hauled there, and that's part of what my stepdad did. Like he hauled the tomatoes for Braze, and he did that and worked for Piper's hauling fuel oil. So, but it was just funny, that connection. And there were other people that were migrant workers that came via there and ended up staying here, Now,
as a child, your mom had a newspaper route, correct? And you did too. So explain some of that. Yeah.
So growing up, my stepdad at one point had a stroke, young. Obviously died at 42, so it was even younger than that. Had a stroke and couldn't work for a while. And there were 7 in my family, and so I don't know whose brainchild it was, but they decided that we could deliver papers. And so it started out, like doing a motor route, which means you drive around, deliver to houses. We picked up the newspapers downtown and brought them back to Morrisville for the delivery for everybody. And what that meant for me as a kid, we would get up, we'd go to bed at night, we'd get up at 1 o'clock, drive downtown Indianapolis off of West Street, pick up the newspapers, come back to Morrisville, drop them off, deliver a few on the way home, come home, get home by 3 or 4, go back to bed, get up and go to school. And because I was one of the younger ones, I got to go like Monday, Tuesday, or sometimes Wednesday, because Thursday's papers were really big. And smaller kids, we couldn't fold the papers and put them in a mailbox, so the bigger kids had to do that. We did that for years. And when we quit the motor route, we still kept the route in Monrovia, and we delivered every house in Monrovia. That's just what we did, us kids did, for money. And that was up because I got my real first job when I was, I think, 7th grade. So that was prior to 7th grade when I was delivering papers.
So you also worked at the Chicken.
Yes, and that was my first real job. And my mom had did that. I mean, my mom worked at a place in Morrisville, delivered papers, and worked at the Chicken. And so when I was like, I think it was around 7th grade, something like that, the Chicken had just opened over here, and they decided that they would go to the Morgan County Fair and have a stand there, basically to promote their food and stuff. And it was kind of in competition with Gray's, that kind of home cooked type stuff. And so they went down there to work, and my older sister worked there, and my mom worked there. And so they were like, hey, you know, you want to come down and clean tables? And I was like, oh yeah, sounds like fun, plus you're at the fair. So I go down and I'm cleaning tables, and they were way over, I mean, like they had no idea it would be that popular. They could not keep up with people that wanted food. And so then finally I'd be cleaning tables, and then somebody'd sit down and say, hey, I need a cheeseburger and fries and blah, blah, blah. So then I slowly started taking orders, and by the end of the week, I had a job. Just because they were like, you're pretty good at this. You want to work? And so I then worked all through high school.
And the Chicken was where the dentist and doctor's office is at now.
Mm-hmm.
It was owned
right
by
next door.
Grendeens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. And we had open campus then at school. So all the kids at lunch, if they wanted, some went downtown, but they could go there and eat lunch. And that was a big deal. Like, I mean, we all went there and ate lunch because you got to leave.
And there was open campus because, one, the cafeteria wasn't quite large enough, and then there were so many places downtown to
Right,
eat.
right.
Okay. So having went to school at Monrovia, you and I have talked about Virginia Jett. She's like this iconic teacher who's in the Monrovia Alumni Hall of Fame and did such work on the history of the town. So what was it like having Virginia Jett as a teacher?
Well, first off, I love school, and so every teacher I had, I can't say I ever had a teacher I didn't like. So, but I had her in grade school. She was my 5th grade teacher. I was the 3rd child in the family, so she'd already been through, like, I was the 3rd one for her to get, because back then one teacher taught, you know, had all the kids. And but Virginia we knew personally too, and that was because somehow my mom knew her from Trafalgar, family connection, I don't know. Then at one point when we were in Monrovia, we moved across the street from her dad, and just interacting with her, I mean, my mom already knew her, but helping out with him, and I mean, we were young kids, we'd go hang out, you know, he probably, I don't know, you know how that is when you have an older neighbor. So then I get her in school, and my brother had her, he was the oldest, and she had paddled him in class, which back then was real common to be paddled. She found out later that what she paddled him for he had not done. And so she had to call my mom after school that day because somebody fessed up to what had really happened. And she, had to call my mom and apologize that she paddled him. Of course, my mom was like, oh, won't hurt him, one paddling. When I had her in 5th grade, because I knew her, and I was a decent student, and one day she gave us an assignment and said, everybody stay in their seats. And I, of course, thought it meant everybody but me. And so I finished my assignment, so I walk up to her desk to ask her who knows what. And she said, Judy, didn't I say stay in your seat? And I said, I know, but, and she goes, no. And so she tied me in my chair with a jump rope, and I couldn't get up. So it's like, but I still liked her. I mean, she was just a likable, and then years later, I worked with her on the alumni, and she was just so appreciative and just you would have thought I was giving her $1 million every year because I was getting the class composites made.
Yeah.
And it was that was so easy, but she so appreciated it,
So you went to the elementary that is now the middle school.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And then now, did you ever attend the old school across the street?
Yes, we were the last class as a 7th grader. Our class of 72 was the last class as 7th graders to go there. After that they closed it. I don't remember the transition over here. I know as a 7th grader, we went there, we had class because I had Paul Schuler and he was over there. But we came over here for lunch if we wanted to go to the cafeteria. We came over for band, PE, which actually was in this room.
Right.
It was the old multi-purpose room. We came over here for PE. So we still were kind of fanned out. We still used the gym uptown because it was still being used. They were in the process of building the gym now. But yeah, so we were the last class there. But as 7th graders, it just seems, like they let us roam everywhere, and we went where we were supposed to when we came back. But nowadays, I don't think you could do that,
And you had mentioned Mr. Schuler. He's probably the iconic high school teacher of Monrovia. So what was it like having Paul Schuler?
Well, because history's my favorite, so that was like, but I think it's my favorite because of him. I had his wife as a fourth grade teacher, and got a taste. Well, and we knew them also because my stepdad, Ron McCracken, he did some farming and hauling the fuel oil. So we would go to their farm. I can remember going there as a kid and stuff. And so we knew both of him and his wife, Edna. And then I had her in fourth grade. And one of the things they did that were so interesting was they traveled every summer. And so they had been to every historical site in the United States and give you vivid explanations of it. And so that just made it so much more real. And then when I was in junior high and high school, he would do field trips. And so he might go to Illinois to something to do with Lincoln, or go to Kentucky, whatever. I never could go because I always had a weekend job, but he would always share that stuff with us. And for whatever reason, him and I just really, he liked me, I really liked him. A lot of people were scared of him. I saw him mad, but I was never afraid of him. I loved his classes. I loved his approach to teaching. I really and as I went through school, I only had him for junior high, and then for U.S. history was the only thing, because then he retired before I had him for government. And but I got married in high school, and I invited him to the wedding, and him and his wife came, which was just really meant a lot to me, because it's you don't always know if teachers really appreciate or really knows your person. And but I really, really liked him, and thought him and his wife really gave a lot back to the school.
Yeah. Now, when you were in school, the one thing you and I have talked about is going to games. And you had mentioned there was a fan bus. So what was that kind of like?
Yeah, so when I got to junior high, that was a big deal. My brother played basketball, but they had a fan bus for every away game. And you were going to places like Bell Union and Bainbridge and these little, eminence, these little schools, but everybody had an old gym, and so I don't even know if you had to pay. I just remember you'd meet at the school, get on the fan bus, they'd drive us all over there, and it was fun. It was fun. I can remember we went to Eminence one time, and they didn't take a fan bus, or it was too, I don't know. We didn't ride the fan bus, and some parent came by and said, "Hey guys, I've got room," and we ended up riding with him, because it was the place to be. Everybody wanted to be at the game on basketball, and that was basketball.
Yeah, but especially Eminence, that gym at the time was a new
cutting edge. Yeah,
gym.
it was And then here, once we got the new gym, I was in band, and not very good in band, but I was in band, and started out marching in the old gym, and I got in band because my older siblings were in band, and it was kind of they kind of recruited you, because I don't know, maybe nobody wanted, but anyway, because I remember the band director asked my mom, was don't your kids want to be in band? And she's like, sure, and signed us up. So then we moved from the old gym up here, and we get this new gym, and it's like we've got it's something really big deal. And the band room is where Mrs. Demick's room's at now, and total different setup. So that room, and then it had two offices off that room, which one was for the instruments and one was the band directors, and then go a little bit the other direction, and there was a set of steps that went down to the gym. And so we performed at every home basketball game, and that meant we performed on the floor, a marching routine. Every kid was on the floor. On Monday we would get the show we were doing, and it was on a grid of paper, and you were grid number 22, and you went from your spot to and they'd make different things and whatever, and we did a different show every week. Looking back, I'm like, that's just mind-blowing, but it's just what you did. We went down during band and practiced on the gym floor, practiced the music, and then practiced the marching. We'd stay after school. I was in the pom-pom whatever majorette group. That's what I was doing. But we marched at every game. The other thing we talked about is every week we had a school spirit I don't remember what they called it, but it was a contest for every class. So 7th grade, because we were all together, 7th grade through seniors, you decorate your part of the hallway every week. And then what we called neutral space, which meant spaces where there weren't lockers, which would be where the office was, the hallway that went down to the gym. There was a candy store. All that's, the candy store is where the athletic office is now. All of that was free space, and whoever got there first got to decorate it. And so we, being like, our class was a bunch of overachievers, and we would come to school at like 5 in the morning on Monday, because that's when you could get in. And then Bruce and Kay Axon was custodians, and we would hook them up. We would tell them, it was like, we're going to be there, will you let us in? And they would come and monitor, so we weren't in the building without somebody. Right. And we would, and so we had some really talented people, so we would win all the time. Then they tried to figure out a way that, they felt like it was biased. We were getting the first jump, but it was just fun.
Now, when you had band, there wasn't football back then.
No.
So what did band do like in the early part of the year? You had mentioned something about qualifying for the state fair or something.
Well, we started out, and we didn't always do that. I mean, but our band director, I think, was trying to branch out what we were doing, and because he was fairly new. He had Mr. Ormady had been here for years, and he was like, was an icon here.
Yeah.
And so when Mr. Avery came, and he was younger and was kind of trying to do some different things, and so he started out, and we entered, like, the county fairs had a marching contest, and so we would go to Morgan County, we went to Shelbyville, and then evolved into us going to the state fair. And so we went up there and competed, which was kind of eye-opening, because you compete against everybody, Ben Davis,
right,
Center Grove, whatever. And I remember the first time we competed, it was like, whoa, this is really above where we are. But it was still good. It was a fun experience. And so, but band, I mean, just like everything else at Monrovia, like, kids so had to multitask. Like, the kids playing basketball were in the band, but they marched, like, so they played basketball, and if you were on the JV, you played the game, and then everybody else went to the locker room, and you went out and marched with the band. Somebody brought your saxophone down, and you performed.
How many kids were in the band when you were in high school?
I want to think probably only 60 or maybe, but then again, I don't really know. Well, you know what? It's more than that, because I've looked at pictures now. Because the girl group was probably 20 girls at least. So it's big.
Was it just high school kids, or did you have any junior high kids in the band?
You could be in 8th grade. Yeah.
Now, did the band stay for the whole game, or did they just march and go back up to the band room?
No, they stayed. Yeah, because we sat in a section, like,
okay.
But it wasn't like what we have now with jazz band. I mean, it's kind of a little bit different, because it was the whole band. They had a jazz band. Jazz band was awesome, but they perform more competition kind of things.
Now, later on, you would be a band parent.
Yes.
When Dave Knott was here,
right,
which is really like an iconic period for the band. So what was Dave Knott like, and what was it like? How much work did you do as a band parent?
Well, as a band parent, so then, fast forward all those years, now I have 2 kids, and my oldest was very into band, and my youngest did it. It wasn't like, I think he was doing it because she did it, it was expected. But both me and my husband, we did all the fundraising stuff, went to the Hoosier Dome. That was the big moneymaker back then. I mean, not always, but we got into doing that, which was the easiest way to make money. So we go to the Hoosier Dome and work. So we finally worked our way up to we were working Cold's Game, which is how they make good money. So that's how we funded everything. And then we would spend every Saturday at a contest, and then a lot of times turn right around and go back down to the Dome on Sunday and work a game. And then, so they marched at football games. It was pretty much the same type season our band does now. And it was the same kind of competition. We never did Bands of America. Don't know that was around then. My husband, he's a carpenter, and so he's done a lot around the school just because of what he did for a living. And at one point, the band director, Dave Knott, wanted a band.
Tower. Observation
That's a good,
post.
yes, that's
Yeah.
what they're called. At other schools, they're towers, and they're usually built out of aluminum, and they have stairs that go up to the top so they can view what the band's doing. So you'll see them at like Plainfield and Martinsville and places like that. Monrovia, being on a tight budget, couldn't afford that. So they approached my husband and a couple of the band parents and said, hey, is this something you can build? And Terry's like, sure. And so they build this band tower, which ended up being this huge thing in the middle of the parking lot, out of telephone poles, and I don't know how tall it was. It was crazy. The stairs was on the inside, and you climbed up to the top, and there's a platform. We ended up calling it Knott's Landing because Dave Knott was the band director. That was about the time Knott's Landing was a show, and it just kind of followed suit, which was really funny. But it was there for, a long time, until finally, David left, and they even changed where the band practiced, so they don't even do that out there anymore.
And who really helped Terry with the supplies?
Well, Bob Shriver, who's another iconic person who's been around this area, we've always known Bob. His son was older than our son, but for whatever reason, they just hung out together. They enjoyed baseball,
Fishing.
and fishing, yes. And so, and my husband and Bob both love fishing. So they had that in common, and they would and Bob was an insurance salesman by trade, and so he could get anything. And so Terry would say, Bob, I need telephone poles. And he's like, well, let me see what I can do. And within a day, he had him donate it from REMC at Martinsville. And then Terry said, well, how are we going to get him here? And he goes, I don't know, I'll work on that. And then he got somebody that went and hauled him with the semi and brought him here. We went to build a shelter house down at the baseball field. And Terry said, this is what we need. And Bob starts working on I think that he got the school to donate the material if Terry would donate the man hours, and they got it built. And that's just what they did. Like when they needed stuff done, you went to Bob and said, this is what we need, and Bob okay, I'll let you know.
Seems like one thing kind of unique about Monrovia, and this is what Dean Hadley and I had talked about, was it seemed like there's time periods where, like when the football program got started, just people just all did what they could. Mm-hmm. And you had the same thing with like Little League Baseball and the band parents. It just seems like Monrovia is kind of at its best when it has that community spirit. So what did you ever, was the fall carnival still a thing when you were in school at all?
Yes. And so, the first time I remember doing it, and I don't remember, I was still in grade school. It was still in the old gym. And the old gym was like a different kind of set. Well, first of all, it was a gym, but it was really, when you look back at pictures, it was little. I don't know what the capacity was, but
six rows of bleachers.
Yeah, 6 rows of bleachers. The end of where one of the goals was, there was these 2 big doors that they opened up for air circulation, but if you stepped out, you went down 20 feet. It wasn't someplace you wanted to really step out. It had a stage, and then there was a walkway, so when you exit, you went up this walkway, but it was like a ramp. So it wasn't stairs, but it slowly went up to street level. But along there were these rooms. And looking back, I don't really remember like what the front of it looked like, but in those rooms, so in that gym, and then along those we would set up booths. And the first one I remember doing, our class did a cakewalk, which was basically everybody donates a cake and you go around and play music and somebody wins a cake. And then later on, when we got into junior high, they built the multi-purpose room and we moved it over here. And so the senior class always got to have the basketball shoot, which you pay a quarter to shoot a basket and win whatever. And so we were trying to come up with something, and we came up with the Coke toss. And it was back when you had the great big liter bottles, kind of, but they were in glass. They were glass bottles. And so we just bought a whole bunch of cake. We got them through the concession stand, and then we had rings, and if you hit one, you win a pop, Well, it was so popular, like we made like more money than any booth had ever made. And so then the senior class decided, oh, well, maybe we should just take that. Luckily, our sponsor fought for us and said, no, once they have it, they get to keep it till they don't want it anymore. And we kept it all the way through high school because we made more money than anybody. But yeah, that was a fundraiser that we did for prom, like what they do now. Also, classes raise money, but they also had the candy store.
Right.
And the classes run the candy store for prom, not the way that it's done now. Of course, now we couldn't get by with the candy store.
Yeah. So this is the kind of how we always have the final question. What do you remember about downtown Monrovia? Like the stores and groceries and going to them, what do you remember about those?
So downtown, like I said, downtown Monrovia was like the only place we had to go. We shopped down there. McLeod's was a grocery plus what we called a dry goods store, which meant you could go in there and buy jeans, you could buy material, you could buy thread, you could buy, like a 5 and dime kind of thing. The two grocery stores, which is, we never went to the other one because I don't know. My mom worked at McLeod's. Maybe that was part of it. She worked there, so we always shopped there. We never went. Us kids went to the other store because they had better candy.
At the time, was it Dowden's?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it was Dowden's.
Now, when you were younger, was McLeod's that whole building?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And there was a barber shop across the street. Was where the barber shop's at now was a restaurant. There was, the bank was there, the post office was there. Everything was on Main Street. And so as a kid, we lived south on 39, but as a kid, when we had our paper out and whatever, we would, because sometimes they would drop the papers off at our house, but that meant we had to bicycle them all up to town to deliver. And on the days we couldn't do that, us younger kids. So sometimes we'd have them drop at Bonnie and Jesse's house, and we would go there and pick them up and then go do our routes. So we were in town all the time. Everybody in town knew us. First of all, there were 7 of us, and they knew us kids because we had a paper route. My dad delivered the fuel. We just had a connection to everybody. But it was also something, even when we were little, we could, they'd send us to town with a quarter and say, you can go, go buy candy or whatever. So it was just a different atmosphere. And if something bad happened, somebody was going to help you. There was always somebody home. My sister one time got run over by a kid on a bicycle and got injured, and we were a long way from home, but somebody came out and called our parents and took care of us. So there was that downtown atmosphere of, you could go into any store, they knew who you were. As soon as they walked in, they'd say, hey, Judy, whatever, And so that's what it was like. And it was so, and kids nowadays, I tell my granddaughter, and she's like, really? And I go, no, Monrovia we never went to Mooresville for anything. And nobody went to Mooresville until they had their license. And then they went over there and cruised around, But they still hang out in Monrovia, So it was just a really neat small town atmosphere, which unfortunately we've lost, know.
So it was McLeod's, and then what was it, Bray Hardware when you were a kid?
No, it was Shorts Hardware when I was a kid. And then there was, but I can't, there was one on the corner where the cafe's at, and I don't remember what, because I thought Shorts was across the street, but maybe not.
Well, it was for a while, then we think that it was torn down for the drive-through of the bank.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So, and then Dowden's, and then was it Bateman's Restaurant?
No, when it was a restaurant, it was Fincham. Well, I don't know what they called it, but and the Fincham ran it. She was the cook, and that's the only person I remember in there. And the hardware store, I was trying to think.
Was it Kenworthy?
Kenworthy's, and then, oh my gosh, on the corner, Miller's.
Oh,
which Miller's was, I think, used to be, it was a welder then, but before that he was shoot horses and things like that. It was a blacksmith shop originally. And so when you look at all and then the Methodist Church was downtown, which was a big deal because it was a big church right in the middle of town. So the buildings have changed, but yet stayed the same. The lodges, we used to go to a square dance thing that was upstairs in one of the lodges. Like I said, the barbershop was downtown. There was a little bit of everything. They changed hands. I can remember when the phone company came in, or it was bought by somebody, which, you know, as a kid, you don't even realize what that means.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it was like a true switchboard, you know, where you would call somebody up, you know, and everybody had, like, you only had a 4-digit number, and you had
Yeah.
a party line, you know, so that was totally different.
So there was Pfeiffer's,
Yes.
and then there was the gas station on the corner, which
Right.
is typically referred to as Marley's, but other people have owned it.
Yes, over the years, yeah. And there was a restaurant in between them at one time, and I don't know what happened to that restaurant. I just remember my mom telling stories, so that would have been back in the, you know, she graduated in 48, Ron graduated in 46, so that was in the 40s when she would come down here after ball games, and they would all go up there they'd all go after a game and have pie and a Coke, you know, but that's what they did.
And did she ever mention the dancing?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah,
All right.
yeah. So, and I can remember the building kind of, and it kind of gave you that dance hall
Right.
kind of thing, which makes me think they just pushed the tables back because it had a wooden floor, that kind of thing. But like I said, that was more her memory. By the time I was out as a kid, it wasn't there any longer. And then I think Pfeiffer's had, I don't know if they originally owned it or whatever, but they had torn it down and used it for part of their gas station, you know, what he did there. I don't know if he worked on I think he worked on cars. I think they had like a, you know, that kind of thing. And Pfeiffer, and they live right next door, which, I mean, everybody lived in town. I mean, the whole McCracken clan lived, you know,
In that
right
area.
around the corner. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that was our last question here.